everyone. This is Bill Griffin. Welcome to the Different Take podcast. Today, I want to talk about how the media produces distrust in our criminal justice system. If you're like me, you like Westerns, movies, TV shows like Gunsmoke and Bonanza, and in these programs, shows, there's a common scene in which the sheriff is protecting a prisoner from the mob that want to extract their own justice, and instead the sheriff is protecting the prisoner from them so that prisoner can get a fair trial. The message always being that it is sort of barbaric, or is barbaric, to let people get their own justice rather than the criminal justice system work. Nowadays, what you have is the mob is not happy with certain verdicts after the person gets fair trial. So what I'd like to talk about today is a high-profile case. This is the facts as we understand them. Person A is in their vehicle and observes Person B, whom they believe may be an intruder in their neighborhood, and calls the police. It is nighttime and raining. Person A is armed with a handgun, exits the vehicle, and follows Person B from a distance, loses sight of Person B, and then attempts a return to their vehicle. During this attempt, Person A happens back on Person B. Person B initiates a physical altercation with Person A, proceeds to beat Person A fairly severely, and Person A ends up shooting Person B. Person A is prosecuted. Sure, you can recognize the facts of this case. It's the George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin trial. In spite of the fact that zero evidence was presented at trial that Zimmerman did not act in self-defense, the prosecution did not disprove this. People to this day believe that George Zimmerman murdered Trayvon Martin and that he did so because Trayvon Martin is black. His story was broken immediately after, or almost immediately after, by NBC News that doctored a 911 call in which they edited in such a way that the general public may think that Zimmerman was following Trayvon Martin because he's black and killed him because he was black, and Trayvon Martin was unarmed. So this, I hate the word narrative because it always implies that the story isn't true, but this story was told from the very beginning in the media. And it was so much pressure to convict George Zimmerman that even Obama spoke out about it. He says, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. Well, who knows what he meant by when he says the word look. But it does imply, and many people have pushed this mythology that Trayvon Martin was innocent and George Zimmerman murdered him. This has been going on for now 10 years. So Obama was very careful about this, but I think it's strange that a president any time gets involved in speaking out about matters that really do not concern him. This is a local matter. There was no reason to think at all that the court system in Florida, where George Zimmerman lived, wouldn't be able to have a fair trial. The evidence was not according to the chief of police, sufficient to arrest George Zimmerman. The state of Florida appointed a special prosecutor. Her name's Angela Corey. They do not take this to the grand jury, decide to charge him. As anytime a special prosecutor gets involved, someone's going to get charged. And then the weight of the state goes after George Zimmerman in a trial that lasted a few weeks. The media during this trial is what they usually do, and a lot of people piled on, politicians and so forth. Political activists were pressing for conviction, and early on, as the media often does, they rarely promote acquittal. During the trial, there would be legal experts on the left-wing media that would explain the trial and how great the prosecution was doing, and they would ignore the presumption of innocence, and they would present facts that were not in the best light for the defendant, George Zimmerman. So there's a lot of intense media coverage of this, negative to George Zimmerman. They were prepping the public for a big disappointment because the prosecution really had no case at all. If you watch the closing argument by the prosecutor, his name is Bernie De La Rionda. It's a 2-hour and 15-minute argument. And during this argument, there's an enormous lot of speculation, enormous a lot of emotion. He talks several times about Trayvon Martin was in a hoodie, and he had Skittles, and George Zimmerman was following him. The implication, although he never said it, was he's following because he was black. He goes into a lot of theatrics, a lot of finger pointing at Zimmerman. He calls him a murderer. The judge in the case allows De La Rionda to refer to to Trayvon Martin as victim. Well, the purpose of a trial is to determine whether there in fact is a victim. So there was a lot stacked up against Zimmerman in terms of the emotion about this, because there were the emotional aspect, because you're trying to portray an innocent 15-year-old, or I think he was 17-year-old child, on how tragic it is that he loses his life. But the facts of the matter just don't add up for Trayvon Martin. During this closing argument, the prosecutor really acts as the defense attorney for Trayvon Martin. There was no evidence, and the prosecution really did not present any evidence that George Zimmerman started or the physical altercation between he and Trayvon Martin. The prosecutor never mentioned the idea that, mentioned any theory on how Zimmerman suffered any injuries from Trayvon Martin. So Zimmerman was injured about his head, on the front and the back of his head, and the prosecutor admits that there was a physical struggle between the two individuals. So he really acts as the defense attorney, trying to cast doubt on whether or not Trayvon Martin started the altercation. And in regards to the injuries, he doesn't have a theory, but he tries to, maybe he already had those injuries before the fight started. And there's no evidence for that. So all the evidence pointed toward plenty of reasonable doubt that George Zimmerman was acted in self-defense. On that evening after the closing argument ended, the media lauded the prosecutor for a great closing statement. And they were really prepping, again, the public for disappointment, because the jury could not, or a great deal of the public for disappointment, because the jury could not get there. So a couple days later, when the verdict was announced, now where the prosecuting team were on the verge of being heroes, we're now goats. And they, even to this day, has hurt their reputation personally. Because they didn't get a conviction done. The media really portrayed this as an unjust verdict. They also, prior to the trial, portrayed this trial as necessary to the charges. The trial needed to happen. There was no courage, in my opinion, on the part of the state to step up and say, look, we don't have the evidence to convict George Zimmerman, and we have to convict beyond a reasonable doubt, and we're not going to be able to do that. But this was really a political prosecution. It wasn't based on any facts. Aftermath in this trial from the media was that this was an unjust verdict. But they didn't come out and say this. It's just implied that it's an unjust verdict. Obama spoke out about it afterwards. He said, again, implying that Trayvon Martin could have been a son of his. God, I hope not. There's no evidence that he did anything but start a fight, beat the hell out of somebody who happened to have a gun and shot him. So I just don't think Barack Obama would have raised a son that would have done such a thing. So this mythology has continued until this day, and part of that is due to an interview with one of the jurors. This is a very interesting interview, in my opinion. It's kind of goes to show how jurors they're not perfect, as we all are not perfect, and sometimes they can make a mistake. But her approach, the approach that this juror had to the trial, is very, very interesting. She was interviewed on ABC News by Robin Roberts, who during the interview displayed a lot of empathy for the juror, and of course the implication was, how could you have voted? I have so much sympathy for you because you weren't able to get your colleagues to come along with your true desire to get a conviction. At least that's the way I take the questions. But I want to go through some of it.
Tonight, one woman comes forward to tell us what happened on the other side of those closed doors. ABC's Robin Roberts sat down for an exclusive interview with a woman who felt the weight of the world on her shoulders.
We, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty. The not guilty verdict that set George Zimmerman free in the shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin rattled the nation, with many Americans questioning the jury's decision and wanting to ask the jurors a very tough question.
Some people have said George Zimmerman got away with murder. How do you respond to those people who say that?
George Zimmerman got away with murder, but you can't get away from God.
Juror B29, Maddie, came forward today in an ABC News exclusive interview. She said it wasn't an easy decision.
It's hard for me to sleep. It's hard for me to eat.
You haven't asked for money. You haven't asked for a book deal. You haven't asked for anything other than a forum to be able to tell your story.
Yeah. I don't need money. No money in this world could pay me to forget the pain that I'm going through. Trayvon Martin will always be in my heart.
But she wanted to talk about the verdict, how the jury reached it, and about what she sees as perhaps a higher justice.
At the end of the day, he's going to have a lot of questions and answers he has to deal with. The law couldn't prove it. We just have to believe in the Lord that if he has to pay, he will pay.
Maddie says putting her emotions aside and only considering the law was not easy.
I stand by the decision because of the law. If I stand by the decision because of my heart, he would have been guilty.
A 36-year-old mother of 8 who calls herself a black Hispanic was the only minority on the jury. Since the verdict and the public backlash, she says she has been ridden with guilt.
I feel that I was forcibly included in Trayvon Martin's death.
So I'll talk about what Robin Roberts doesn't ask this juror. I will also say it's very unlikely that Robin Roberts or anybody with ABC News would have interviewed a juror who would have explained that the jury presumed innocence, the state did not meet their burden of proof, and in my opinion, the charges, I don't understand why the charges were brought, because it was a very obvious case that it was very obvious that they didn't have the evidence to convict if you use reason. But ABC would have never done that, in my opinion. So Robin Roberts asked, what was your first vote? And this lady, who goes by the name of Maddie, a juror in the George Zimmerman case, states, my first vote was second-degree murder. He goes on, in between that 9 hours of deliberations, in between that 9 hours, it was hard. A lot of us had wanted to find something bad, something that we could connect to the law. Now imagine this. You're on trial for murder. You're supposed to be presumed innocent. You're trial for your life. And you have a juror that wants, instead of presuming innocent, they want to convict you. And you just picture them going through all this evidence and asking the judge and reviewing it all. And gosh, we got to find something. We got to find something. When actually it's the burden of the state to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed the crime. But instead you have jurors that are actively trying to connect and dots and piece evidence together, whereas if you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, it would kind of be obvious. You wouldn't have to put that effort. So that implies that this juror was asked, can you presume innocence? I can do it. Can you think about this case logically? Can you separate your emotions over the death of the person, the assailant? In the end, Trayvon Martin was the assailant. Can you separate your personal emotions about that in order to think logically and render a verdict. I can do all those things. No, I think you forgot what your purpose was there. That it wasn't your job or your to find this person guilty. She goes on, for myself, he's guilty because the evidence shows he's guilty. Well, if that were true, you would not have voted to acquit, would you? It sort of sounds as if she got out of the jury room, which they were sequestered, realized the public was really ticked off about this, and the media was really ticked off about this, and she came to the conclusion, oh my God, I made a mistake. Really not the way that should work. She goes on, it's hard for me to sleep, it's hard for me to eat because I feel that I was forcefully included in Trayvon Martin's death. I think what that means, my interpretation is, of course, is really who knows, and maybe it's worthless to say this because I don't know, but it sure sounds as if she was forced by our society to participate in the jury process, and she regrets having participated. That's my takeaway from that. She goes on, and as I carry him on my back, I'm hurting as much as Trayvon Martin's mom is, because there's no way that any mother should feel that pain. No, I mean, it's terrible for a mother to feel that pain, but the evidence all points to Trayvon Martin starting the physical interaction and beating the hell out of George Zimmerman by slamming his head on the sidewalk. And George Zimmerman, fearing for his life, shoots him. Legally, he's an assailant. So yes, a mother would feel bad for that, but would the mother want some person to go to prison? She wasn't there. Robin Roberts asked the jury if she still stood by her decision. And she says, I stand by the decision because of the law. I stand by the decision because of my heart. He would have been guilty. Okay, that's totally emotional. It has nothing to do with logic. Well, the other thing I would say is that kind of might make sense to find someone not guilty, but you kind of think that they did it if there was no eyewitness. In this case, Zimmerman was the eyewitness. But if there was no eyewitness, for example, in the O.J. Simpson case, there's no eyewitness to the murder. So the jury, once the glove must fit, trying on the glove of the O.J. Simpson case, that may have been enough, according to the jurors, some of them, that was enough to acquit O.J. Simpson. But in this case, there's an eyewitness. So that is a totally, her thinking is totally emotional. It's not grounded on any sort of reason. She goes on, George Zimmerman got away with murder, but you can't get away from God. And at the end of the day, he's going to have a lot of questions and answers he has to deal with. The law couldn't prove it. But you know the world goes in circles. This is really a strange thing to say, because even if you presume someone innocent, if you truly presume someone innocent, and the state just doesn't have enough evidence, and for example, the O.J. Simpson case, maybe it's a close call. But in the way she describes this, it's not a close call. George Zimmerman got away with murder. So this is really a strange way to phrase this. And this is totally done in the way ABC asked these questions, splicing the video or editing the video. The phrase "got away with murder" was put in her mouth. Robin Roberts asked that question. Some people have said George Zimmerman got away with murder. How do you respond to those people? So is it possible that she thinks that George Zimmerman really murdered Trayvon Martin but got away with it? It's not logical. But if she really believes that, this video was edited to remove the idea that I was bullied into voting not guilty. Robin Roberts is trying to get her to say this stuff. So he goes on further that, and this is the odd thing, that the only decent question probably asked by Robin Roberts was whether the case should have gone to trial. And she says, the juror says, "I don't think so. I felt like this was a publicity stunt." Now, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around how you could think that someone's guilty and at the same time think that they shouldn't have been charged to start with. That's kind of a strange way to go about it. She goes on to say that the juror, that we let a lot of people down. We just couldn't prove anything. It's not up to the jury to prove anything. But does Robin Roberts point this out? No. ABC and Robin Roberts want to develop the idea that that the jury made an unjust verdict that Zimmerman murdered Trayvon Martin, and this is the way to do it. We get a juror out, national TV, on Good Morning America, and she's going to say that he murdered Trayvon Martin. That's going to be the mythology forever. And once that word's out, you can't take it back. So this is just a really sad state of affairs when the left-wing media can manipulate the public through a variety of ways to promote this mythology, and that it's a terrible thing when when the media can produce these, and I'll end with this, that the media can produce these feelings or emotions that the public should distrust our criminal justice system, when there was nothing in the trial that was done that was unfair, when you go through the closing statement by the prosecutor. So with that, I thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. And I hope you check out our website, check out all the platforms that we're on, and please leave me any comments. I'd love to know if you disagree with my assessment of this. And thank you.